see behind me is actually the most important 50 centimeters square in the Indonesian internet. Now, there's two things you need to know about the internet in Indonesia. The first is, all of it, for some reason, from the outside world, comes into just one room in Jakarta. The second thing you need to know about the internet in Indonesia is that the guy in charge of that one room is a crazy hippie with a very strange sense of humor. Now, I had the pleasure of meeting Johar Alam some months ago when I was in Indonesia. And if you take a closer look at that picture behind me, you'll probably see some little white stickers on all the blue cables. Can you see them? All right. They're all labeled. And they're labeled Facebook, Twitter, Yahoo, Amazon, Apple. And Johar says to me, "Mike, do you want to see something really cool?" And I was like, "Sure, Johar. What is it?" He goes, "Do you want to see me take Facebook offline for all of Indonesia for 30 seconds? And I was like, "I don't think you should do that." And he said, "Sure, I do it all the time. Everyone in this country thinks the internet's really unreliable, but it's just me pulling out cables." I tell you this story, not just because it's strange, but it might surprise you that Indonesia is actually the world's single largest market for BlackBerry users. But I also tell you this story because I want you to realize just how far I've had to wander lately in the answer, looking for the answer for a question. And the question is this: what are the next big shifts capable of transforming business and society? I think we have the intuition that ultimately it's about the intersection of consumers and technology. But how do you spot the signals that are truly meaningful with all the noise of continuous change? Because if you can strip away all the stuff that's happening right now, I think it's in that moment that you really get a glimpse of what the future looks like. You see, the future's not a faraway place. It's not a place created by scientists or technologists. It's actually a place that's just the aggregation of all the small changes in our daily lives. And it's in that moment when you realize the power of consumer behavior that I think you really understand what the future of media is going to be. So that's what I'd like to do with you today. I'd like you to take a minute to stop thinking about technology and to think about anthropology. Because being a good anthropologist most of the time is actually just about paying attention and about learning about the world around you and paying attention to your consumers, to your clients, and understanding what's changing. You know, I learn all sorts of things when I travel. I learned things actually when I arrived in Norway a few days ago, even though I've been a few times. I learned, for instance, that there are 3 things in Norway that you do more than any other country on the planet. And all of those 3 things begin with F. Can you think what they are? Let me help you. Number 1, you're on Facebook more than any other country on the planet. Number 2, you drink fizzy drinks more than any other country on the planet. And number 3, are you wondering what it is? Let me help you. You do it even more than the Swedes, despite their reputation. Number 3, you eat more frozen pizza than any other country on the planet. So you see, anthropology is really at the heart of what it is to be in the media business. And let's play a little bit of that today, because I want to ask you a quick question, a very anthropological question. How many of you have children? Please raise your right hand. My God, you're busy. Now I know what you do in the winter months. All right. Well, then ask yourself this question. If your kids ran the media, what would they do differently? And actually, I want you to actually ask this question. Turn to the person next to you and tell them one thing you think might be different if your kids ran the media. Take a few seconds now. You know, it always disturbs me how much laughter there is when I ask that question. Who here heard something that terrifies them? Okay. Who here is glad their kids aren't running the media? Who here thinks their kids run their household? You know, the fact is, the new generation don't just represent a new readership. They represent a profound state of mind change in what it is to be in the content business. And I don't believe in demographics that much, Generation X and Generation Y, but there is one generation I think absolutely represent a shift in thinking. And that's the generation that I call the naturals. It's the people born after 1994. And the reasons for that, I think, will become very apparent if you think about what happened in 1994. Now, I know it's a little bit of a way back, but I'll give you a few things to jog your memory. Number one, chances were in 1994, this was the song you heard. Who here remembers this? Swedish band, Ace of Base. Who here bought the single? No, there's got to be a few more than that. There's a number one song in Norway. I know it's embarrassing. Okay, who here recognises this woman? Oh, really? Lorena Bobbitt. Oh, okay, now the men in this room should at least know who this is. If you don't know who I'm talking about, get someone next to you to draw you a diagram. In 1994, an apparently sane jury acquitted her on grounds of insanity. Well, 94, this man, of course, became president of South Africa and changed a whole generation. This was the #1 show in television. Embarrassingly, Beverly Hills 90210, and apparently also the height of fashion. 94, O.J. Simpson proved that you could have a national rally race in a white Bronco on television. And of course, importantly for the point of view of our story, this man not only saved the environment a few years ago, in 94 he claimed to have invented the internet. You see, in 94, the first commercially available web browser, Netscape Navigator, was brought onto the market. And if you think about it, from that point on, any child born after that date has grown up never knowing a world without the web. So all the stuff we've had to learn, all the stuff we've had to complain about and master, mobile, internet, HTML, Facebook, Twitter, for this generation has been entirely natural for them. They've grown up with it. So you can see why when the governor of California came back from the future as an evil robot, he chose 1994 as the date that would change world history. So let's go a bit deeper into this generation. So, once again, those of you that have children, which is most of you, can I ask, do any of you actually have a child born in 94? Please raise your hand. Okay, yes, you. Please tell me your name. Yana. What's the name of your child?
Lucas.
Oh my God, it's a word I can't pronounce. So say it again, please.
Lucas.
Lucas, okay, I can handle that. Let me tell you a bit of a story about Lucas's childhood. You see, in the year that Lucas was born, 1994, it was also the year the web was born. But you know, Lucas and the web had a very jealous older sibling. It was called the PC. And the PC was already 19 years old in the year that Lucas was born. Now, what have you noticed if the internet goes off at work for more than 3 minutes? It's chaos. It's panic. People are like, we might as well go home. We can't work. What the hell did we do for 19 years before the internet? Well, on Lucas's second birthday, 1996, was a very important year for the web because Hotmail was launched. And if you think about it, that was the first time the internet stopped just becoming about documents being linked together with hyperlinks. And for the first time, it became about software. Lucas's dad got a first-generation Palm Pilot. Do you remember these? They're huge, they're the size of a brick in your pocket. He should have kept it, of course, because they now sell for a fortune on eBay as retro antiques. 1999, Lucas's 5th birthday. Sean Fanning, another kid, becomes the most hated person in the entertainment industry. Do you remember why? Created Napster. And from that point on, no self-respecting child ever paid for music again. It almost destroyed the music industry. The year 2000, Lucas turned 6. His parents get their first DVD player. Really interesting year because they stopped renting movies and they started buying them. It would actually almost save Hollywood. A Swedish e-tailer, Boo.com, in that year also became the first spectacular casualty of the dot-com bust. Not that Lucas cared, of course. 2001, Lucas turned 7. He gets a first-generation iPod for his birthday, and because, let's face it, he was a little bit spoiled, he also got an Xbox for Christmas. Turned out it was the best thing his mother ever did. She never saw him again. He locked himself in his room. Every night his mother had to slide his dinner under the door. 2005, Lucas turns 11. He gets his first camera phone. He joins MySpace. He's now watching YouTube. He's spending hours of his life on World of Warcraft. His parents should be going mad with worry, but they're too busy watching that brand new 42-inch plasma to notice. 2007, he's junked his iPod for an iPhone. He's convinced his dad that PlayStation 3 is not a game machine, but a fancy Blu-ray player. His dad falls for it. Sounds like a few of you did as well. 2008, Lucas is now 14. He never watches television. He thinks that music and movies on shiny discs are not only strange, but strangely retro. He now gets all his music from Spotify. He spends his whole life on Facebook and Twitter. In Lucas's own circle of friends, he is the celebrity. You know, this year, he turned 16 and he's just bought a new single from his favourite Norwegian pink blogger, Vu. And he's even gone to a concert in Oslo. He feels so bad about it, he even wants to pay for her ringtones rather than just stealing them. Now I want you to think about this. In just a few years' time, it'll be 2012. Apparently the end of the Mayan calendar, the end of civilization as we know it. But there's one thing I can tell you for sure. In that year, Lucas and his generation of naturals will stop being kids. They're going to turn 18. They're going to become adults. And that is the beginnings of a dramatic shift that we've never seen before in the media industry. A shift that will change media as we know it. And you know, that terrifies the media companies. I used to work for a newspaper company. And I remember we'd sit around in strategy discussions and they would say, look, I know these kids are doing disruptive things with the internet, but don't worry, when they turn 30 and they get a mortgage and they have children, they're going to go back to reading newspapers again. I've never seen such wonderful but misplaced optimism in my life. Because we know that if you've grown up like Lucas on that time frame, you just see the world and you see media differently. And how do you see it? Well, you know, a friend of mine was saying he's been using the iPad as a babysitting device. He's giving it to his 2-year-old. But then he noticed something really interesting. His 2-year-old was in front of the television and was dragging his hand across the screen. And he said, Dad, the television is broken. Dad was saying, why? He says, like nothing was working. You see, when you're a kid, now that you've grown up with all this stuff, you use this idea that media is fluid. But more than that, you have this sense that your own parents don't get it. See, when we grew up, we could program the VCR. That was our dramatic technological triumph. But you see, it's even more dramatic now for children. What you can hear behind me is a song that was actually in the Guinness Book of Records. It's actually a band called Green out of Japan. And they've got the record because they were the highest selling mobile ringtone in history. They sold 1 million downloads in a week. And the funny thing is, the reason why you can't see their faces is that this is a rock band that no one's ever seen. They're anonymous, they're 4 dental students. But the joke is they haven't told their parents they're Japan's biggest rock stars. You see, in Japan, the record companies are smart. They sell CDs to adults and they sell ringtones to kids. They don't try to market both to each because they realize that kids are now of a new media generation. What else makes the naturals different? Well, increasingly the naturals see the web as their mobile phone. China's had 3G for about 12 months now. And you know, nearly 120 million people have switched from their PCs to accessing the web from their phone. There's been a dramatic shift now in China. The internet is the mobile phone. And you know what's even more interesting? Is that in countries like Indonesia, they don't even know they're on the internet. So something like Facebook is actually just something they do. They don't even realize they're on the web. This is the head of one of the big forums, Danny Wiranto in Indonesia, talking about some surveys he's done talking to Indonesian users.
One thing that I know, actually, like, a lot of people in Indonesia didn't know about the internet much. Okay? I doing the research, like asking, like, do you use internet? The answer is no. And my second question, the question next to it is like, do you use Facebook? The answer is yes. So we figure out that actually this from a handphone users, you know, like every handphone has a Facebook icon. So they don't realize this is an internet. They just like, it's a button, so they click on it and they get Facebook. They think Facebook is some kind of format. You know, they're using Twitter, they don't realize they're using Twitter, they're using internet. That's one thing that's a bit weird. They don't want to be complicated, but the tech, they're more simple, you know. That's why like all the handphone makers and everything have Facebook.
So, you know, in a real sense, the internet as we know it will disappear. All we'll see in the end is just the apps. And for this new generation, airtime has real value. Their mobile phone is their source of their life. So in the Philippines, it's really interesting, because in the Philippines, people now transfer airtime like money. If I owe you $20, I don't give you $20 cash. I'll give you $20 of air credit. And the reason why the telcos have done this is because they've turned all of their users into distributors. So if I need to buy $20 of credit, I don't go to a store anymore. I just buy it off another user. But that's become a basis of a new form of value, a new form of currency. And the virtual, of course, is incredibly real for this generation. One of the companies I look at most is a company called QQ in China. This company did $1.2 billion in US revenues last quarter. And over 70% of that came from sources other than advertising. So if you're a media company looking for your next business model, take a close look at QQ. You know what's amazing? Is that it's all virtual items. So the way it works is that, for instance, I might wake up one day and find someone spent one gold coin to turn my avatar into a pig. I have to spend another gold coin to turn myself back. Then I spend another gold coin to turn him into a goat. Now that sounds ridiculous, until you times it by 568 million users. And you realize that it's why the Chinese government was so worried about the trade in QQ gold coins recently, they seriously considered intervening. They were worried it might destabilize the national currency. So there are some serious side effects. And for this new generation, things like net addiction are also very real. There's some devastating cases now coming out of Korea where a couple recently got arrested. They let their own child starve. They were too busy feeding their virtual baby to remember they had a real one. And one of the fastest growing clinics now in the mainland are internet addiction clinics. And believe me, they're no fun. They run next military compounds. The guy in charge of the program is a guy called General Webb. On General Webb's list of favourite treatments for internet addiction now are sleep deprivation, corporal punishment, and believe it or not, electric shock therapy. There's nothing like 1,000 kilowatts of juice to get you off playing of World of Warcraft. And it sounds dramatic, but you know what? It's because we have a new generation growing up now who've never known a world without the web. They're a living challenge to all of us to rethink the way we do business, or alternatively, get out of their way. So here's the second question I want you to think about. If this new generation are going to reshape media in their own image, what will the media company of the future look like? And it's really difficult, I think, for us to think about this question because as media companies, we're so caught up in the idea that we're actually in the medium business. We're really tied up with formats. We've forgotten that we really should be thinking about audiences, not the stuff that content arrives on. You know, if we actually knew where these content formats came from in the first place, I wonder whether we would be so attached to them. Do you actually know how the CD was invented? It was a Japanese inventor called Professor Nakamatsu. And Professor Nakamatsu has 3 rooms he does his thinking in. The first is he calls the dynamic room. It's a room full of crazy buzzing noises and images. The second room Professor Nakamatsu uses is the quiet room. It's a very zen, peaceful garden. But you know, it was in the third room that Professor Nakamatsu thought up the CD. And his third room is actually a swimming pool. You see, he goes to the bottom of his swimming pool and holds his breath till he nearly passes out. In fact, he also invented the underwater pad and pen so he could record his ideas. It was at the bottom of that pool that he thought of the CD. Now, Nakamatsu actually speculates that he thinks he'll think up his greatest idea at the moment before he dies. Of course, he's also worried he won't be able to write it down. But you can see we're so trapped in this idea that our formats are our source of inspiration, and that we've forgotten that really the idea of the media company as a factory is a limiting idea that limits our imagination. When I worked for this newspaper business, they put me in charge of a special project. It was a project designed to be their bold counter-move against the web, taking away their classified revenues in the car space. And their bold move was to set up a newspaper with free car classifieds to beat the web. Now, I remember sitting down in a board meeting and I said, do you think that perhaps it would be a more bold move if rather than a newspaper we set up a website that had free car classified listings to beat the paid online websites? There was a deathly silence in the room. You know those silences where you can actually hear the clock ticking? And then after a few minutes, someone spoke up on the board. He looked at me and said, you know, you're right. We need a bold, disruptive move. And he turned to the rest of the board and said, maybe we should print the paper on pink paper. They'll never think of that. You know, The fact is, we've always thought of media, I think, as a factory, something that produced physical goods, that was distributed by paper boys, that editors were in charge of selecting the content, that distribution was locked down, until, of course, that factory model effectively came under fire. It exploded because consumers no longer were content to let other people write their content, to let other people select content, and to let other people distribute. So we're in a new world where the factory is no longer the dominant metaphor. And I think ultimately, we need to question how every aspect of the media business will function. It was one of the weirdest features of my childhood, Tom Selleck. You see, because I think television was one of the first areas where the factory got destroyed. I could never understand as a kid how this camp guy with a mustache, driving a red Ferrari with a small dwarf, could be primetime television. And the only reason why it was primetime television was because some guy in a shiny suit in a television network decided that at 7:30, that's what people wanted to watch. And you know, there's going to come a time when we talk to our children and we say, listen, you know, we used to have to pull a bundle of dead trees, pull out a magazine, turn to it today, and look at 7:30 and see, that's what we were allowed to watch. And they're going to look at us like we said we used to ride a horse to work. Because for the new generation, the way they get content is because somebody in their social network has forwarded them a link on YouTube. So their selection and discovery process now is driven by networks. And if you think about it, if readers are in control of the media, if we blow up the idea of the factory, media suddenly looks completely different. Earlier this year I was in Argentina, and I met these two guys behind me. They're actually the guys that run Argentina's biggest website. It's called Taringa. Now the thing about Taringa is that all the content's created by consumers, but more powerfully, the content is actually voted on consumers with a point-based system.
This is Taringa homepage. Here it's the main part, which is the post. Right here, what you can see is all the new posts that should be made. Let's say, for example, this one. Oh, no, maybe this one. Here, what you're going to see is the user. This is Melissa Cat.
So this is interesting. You see here, you got here, this is the number of points she's got as the user. This is the number of posts she's made here, and this is the number of comments. But where this is really powerful is that you can't actually distribute points until you've become a member. And the only way you can become a member is if you write a post that gets at least 50 points given to it. So you have to prove that you're capable of creating good content before you're given the right to vote on other people's content. And this mechanism, this community model of the community determining not only what's good content, but actually becoming a useful resource, has actually polarized the Argentinian community. It's the way that people find out information. And you know, it was funny because the traditional media are always complaining about Taringa. This is a dreadful place full of piracy and bad journalism. So the Taringa members decided to have a bit of fun at the traditional media's expense. You remember in 2006 when Paris Hilton's phone got stolen and hacked, and all the phone numbers, the call records got taken out. Well, the Taringa guys posted a story on that. They posted a list of all the phone numbers that were in Paris Hilton's phone, but they made a few additions. See here, Kay Lenton, that's actually a user on Taringa. So they published that, and of course what happened is the traditional media just cut and paste off Taringa. So all the stories in the major newspapers published the list, you know, with the Taringa user in it. And so the Taringa guy came out and said, look at this, you journalists who hate us actually have just plagiarized us, and we can prove it because we've embedded our name in your own newspaper articles. So you can start to see these new tensions between media companies. But the other thing, of course, is that if we free the idea of the factory, we can start to think of media in a much more expansive sense. We can think of audiences in ways that we haven't before. Another place, unexpected place, where I started to glimpse another future of a media post the factory was, surprisingly enough, in Beirut. Now, it's always a bad sign when you arrive in a country and the airport is empty. You think you may have arrived at the wrong time. In fact, when I checked into the hotel, the guy at the reception said, you know, it's very good of you to come given what's happening. I said, what's happening? And he said, well, it's actually this is the worst tension since 2006. We think the Israelis could invade any time in the next 48 hours to the next week. And I said, what are they waiting for? And he says, well, they always wait for the bad weather, because when there's a storm, the lightning masks the sound of the smart bombs. And I said, well, what's the weather forecast for the weekend? And he looked at me and he said, rain. So I asked my friend, I said, what are we going to do? He says, don't worry about it. It's a media guy. He says, I've got a speedboat on standby. He goes, if the Israelis invade, we can keep partying until the very last minute, and then we jump on the speedboat and it'll take us to Cyprus. But you know what's amazing about Beirut is in 2006 it looked like this. But what they did was they formed a public company, and they took all of the land, and they gave it the shares to different landowners, and they renovated and turned it into the ultimate luxury shopping precinct. And it was in this luxury shopping precinct that I met the founder of this amazing company called SNA Corp, who's actually built a company that targets ethnic users using over-the-top IPTV in different countries.
Our birth was in the US. It was to really bring all of that native content, the ethnic content, to the US over IP, whether it's the web or IPTV or, you know, basically online mediums. That was the inception, really. That was where we started, and then we grew from there. Initially, it was just in the US. We, you know, again, by virtue of doing what we do, we noticed that a lot of our traffic was actually coming from the Middle East. A lot of our Arabic viewers were actually not just in the States, but were in the Middle East, Dubai, Saudi Arabia, and so forth. Believe it or not, I think you're going to see a new trend of Arabic social media is developed. Facebook is great, and it is definitely going to grow and continue to expand in this region. But I think the next thing we're going to see locally here in the Middle East, brand-driven social media networks, whether it's entertainment brands that are pushing it, or even political, or even religious. They're going to take social media and localize it and brand it the way they want it to work. And I think that's going to be the next step. I think you're going to see a lot of mobile consumption and a lot of entertainment-based music, downloads, and even TV now on the mobile and the laptop and even in the household.
You see, once you free up the idea of media just being a territory, you can start targeting users where they are depending on their affiliations, their culture, their ethnicities, and knowing really what they want. I asked Spiro who his biggest advertiser was, and he sort of went quiet for a minute, and he said, I shouldn't really say, but the CIA. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, there's so much war going on in Iraq, they're using our network to find patriotic Arabic speakers to work as translators. So you can see, it's market segments we'd never even considered. So when I think about what the media company of the future looks like, I think this will be the core of it, your server room. Because at the end of the day, it's all going to be about data. You know, if you're really in the audience business, knowing what your readers want, how they think, who they are, that is what ultimately you'll be brokering rather than real estate. And part of that is because we've changed the way we consume media. And Google is a big part of that. If you ever get a chance to visit the headquarters of Google, you should definitely do it. It's a fascinating place in Mountain View. And I was lucky enough to go there. And you can see here in the center, you see here where all the umbrellas are? That's where they have the free rock concerts every lunchtime. They have free valet parking. There's 3 restaurants providing free food. They'll do your laundry for free. I mean, these guys have got way too much money. In fact, Ferrari actually built a dealership not too far away. And the funny thing is that they send all the weird Ferraris there, the ones in the ugly colors. Because I think they think the geeks have got money, but no taste. But the reason why Google's got so much money is because most people don't really understand this diagram. This is a heat map looking at Google's homepage. And you can see here where people look. This is where all the action is. And yet this is where all the money is. And the fact is, AdWords is a very powerful platform. But what really makes Google tick is understanding the fact that now content and the discovery of content, whether you're a media company or a brand, is really the navigation path to which the way people now connect and find companies. It's all about the content, the organic search results. And that means you're going to see new companies now, companies that are reshaping the media industry, like Demand Media. Demand Media doesn't have an editor in charge of selecting what content there is. They have a supercomputer with an algorithm, and they just scan the market to look at what are the search terms people are most interested in. What's the ad market for those words? What's the competition for that? And then their 10,000 freelancers get an email saying, we'll pay you $5 to write an article about how to cleaner pool filter. Now, no editor of Time magazine is going to write that kind of content, but that's the content that you can deduce from people's search behavior. And that, ultimately, is what you're going to be competing with as media companies. And there are other businesses that are even more frightening, I think, like Rapleaf. Rapleaf has a direct API plugin to most of the social networks in the world. And they use that, as they say, rather terrifyingly, they use it to de-anonymize users. So what they can do is they'll take, by just your email address, they can cross-reference that against all of your social media content, all your publicly available information, your gender, your demographics, your political inclinations, the kind of books you read, your hobbies. And political parties now in the United States are using this to target advertising on specific segments taken from your social media usage. So, I think there's a hope for a lot of us that we are moving to a mobile world, but it's going to be a new walled garden, something that Apple, the benevolent dictator, are going to be in charge of and control. Could this be a new factory? Well, the bad news that I'd like to give you is that I don't think Apple is going to win. I've actually got my money on Android, and here's why. Shenzhen have just released a $100 Android phone. All the markets in the emerging world, the countries, the divergence that I spoke about in my speech at Gultaga, are buying these clone phones, these Shanzai banded phones that cost $100. They don't have one but 2 SIM card slots. They don't have iTunes. They've got free TV tuners in them. And that disruptive, fragmented model, I think, is where we're going to end up in the smartphone market for much of the world. So here's a summary. The factory model of media is being exploited by consumers who've taken control of distribution. I believe in the future, media companies must embrace the fact that they're in the audience, not the format business. And the real gold is data, not display real estate. Here's a third question for you to think about. What happens to media when every customer on the planet is connected to each other? I took this picture in Beijing a few years ago. This poor gentleman is trying to make sense of the Beijing subway map. Good luck. But if you can imagine for a minute, this is not just a subway map, but a metaphor. And those red dots are not subway stations, but consumers. You start to get a sense of the networks now that surround us. We're connected on Facebook, on Twitter, on email. Even when you buy a book on Amazon, it's smart enough to know that you're in the same set of people who like that book. And that means as marketers today, we're just another node in that network. You can't buy people's attention. In fact, the brand that matters is not your brand, but their brand. Because in order to get a consumer to distribute your content in their network, it's their brand that's at risk. So to really succeed as a marketer today, you need a little help from your friends. And ultimately that means to be a great marketer, you have to think like a virologist, to understand how content spreads in a network. Because of this, there are businesses that exist today that could not have existed 18 months ago. And one of my favorites is something I saw in LA. It's the Koji barbecue trucks. And I have no idea why you'd want to stuff barbecue meat in a corn tortilla. Californians, as we know, are a bit crazy. But the really crazy thing about the Koji barbecue trucks is you can't just go and buy one on the street. You have to follow them on Twitter. They've got about 100,000 people following them on Twitter. And I saw them, and when I was there was like 100 people on the street. And I said, what are you guys doing? They're like, we're waiting for the barbecue truck. Because what they'll do is Koji will send out a tweet and say, at 3 a.m. we'll be on the corner of Hollywood and Vine. And literally, people will be lining up their hours in advance. When the truck arrives, everyone gets fed the disgusting tacos. Another truck arrives if they need to. But then the trucks leave, they send out another tweet. It's a fast food flash mob. And it's a sign of a business that doesn't just use social media, it relies on social media for its connection with its consumers. So I think the question then becomes, if we're all connected and we behave collectively, what drives popularity? How do we work out hits? How do we work out the things that go viral? Now, one of my favorite social scientists is actually a guy called Duncan Watts. It helps that he's Australian as well, so I feel some patriotism. But Duncan Watts hates Malcolm Gladwell. He thinks The Tipping Point is a useless book. And the reason why he does that is that deep down he doesn't believe that there are certain individuals that are more influential than others. He's done a lot of research into this power of networks, and he ran a very interesting experiment called the Music Lab experiment. He recruited 14,000 people, and he organized them into 8 worlds. In each of these 8 music worlds, he asked people to choose their favorite music. Now, in some of these worlds, he asked people to individually select their favorite songs without reference to anyone else. And in other worlds, he actually allowed people to be influenced by other people's social selections. Now, as you probably imagine, in the worlds where you could see other people's selections, there was a cascade effect. So people were influenced. So you saw waves starting to start. So people would see other people's selections and certain bands would bubble up. But here's the weird thing. When he finally looked at all the results of the 8 worlds, none of them were the same. There was no top hit which appeared in all the 8 worlds, and there was nothing at the bottom that was the same. And what he figured out was, although we're influenced by other people's opinion, essentially what makes a hit is random. Terrifying, isn't it? And what really drove popularity was the early appearance of certain acts. That was the only thing. I mean, will we get another Madonna? Who knows? The only thing that really drives hits in this community aren't mavens or significant influence. It's just the early visibility of things in a social network. That's what drives network growth. So the crowd dynamics, I think, is going to become a big science of understanding as marketers. One of my favorite quotes from Sir Isaac Newton was that I can calculate the motion of heavenly bodies, but not the madness of crowds. Now, I think Sir Isaac was a bit bitter, because in that year, he'd actually lost his entire family fortune on the stock market. But you see, understanding behavioral dynamics, I think, is at the key to the future of marketing. One of my favorite trends I've been tracking in China is this phenomenon of group buying. And you see, you think you might be smart when you buy a fridge. You go online, you find a cheap price, you find a retailer, you go buy the fridge and negotiate. The Chinese are way ahead of you. See, they'll go online, they'll find the best price, but they'll then find 300 other people that want to buy the same fridge. Now, you'll believe me when I tell you they don't ask for a discount. They demand a discount, otherwise they threaten to riot and destroy the store. It's called Tuango. It's a form of entertainment now on the mainland. I think it's visceral proof that sometimes to be a great capitalist, it helps to have been a former communist. But you know what's really interesting? Is that some bright spark in America saw this and thought, we can make a business out of this. You know what that business is? Groupon. Groupon was taken from this Tuango phenomenon in China 4 years ago. And of course, as you know, with Groupon, this social commerce idea, you only get the discount if the 50 or 100 people in your buying group all select to buy it. So this is now taking the world by storm. And in fact, they're now trying to reintroduce it back into China. Groupon's going back into China. But there are brands like Gap that run experiments. They offered a nationwide 50% discount on a $50 purchase. Do you know what? They sold 445,000 vouchers in 24 hours. That's $11 million in merchandise. And that was their trial run. The next time they do it, they plan to personalize it by gender, postcode, and purchase history. So you can see this, smart brands, smart marketers are starting to harness the power of crowds. But also, the next step is how we take that into the real world. One of my favorite examples of that was actually in Israel, where Coca-Cola built the Coca-Cola Village. But what they did was, they gave all these teenagers RFID tags so that you could actually connect that to Facebook and like things in the real world.
Hosts thousands of teenagers for 3 unforgettable days that integrate music, friends, and fun. This year, the Village's site was hosted on Facebook to promote great interaction and broad exposure amongst teenagers. And still, we looked for a fresh way to create excitement. The solution? Bringing the virtual world of Facebook into the real world of the Village. Every Village guest received a wristband holding an RFID microchip that contained their Facebook username and password.
So this was a really good idea, because when you physically liked an attraction in the real world, it actually then went out to 150 or 500 or 1,000 people in the virtual world. So your physical liking actions was then replicated multiple times. So the next step from that, I think, is when even our ambient media starts to respond to our crowd behavior. You know, in Times Square in New York, there was this fantastic digital billboard that used spy technology to actually look out into the crowd to see who was holding a Forever 21 bag. And whoever it was, the model then identified them, and this gigantic 20-foot model reached down and took a Polaroid picture of the person holding the shopping bag. And then showed that picture back to everyone else. Incredible stuff. In fact, if you actually walk into the Forever 21 store, it recognizes that, and paparazzi photos go off all around you. So, I think it's not enough just to understand online consumers. You need to study how they behave collectively. I believe the real science of the 21st century, when we look back, will be that science of networks, how they grow, what drives popularity, and importantly, knowing when an online crowd can also turn into a mob. Question number 4. So if audiences now can choose to ignore advertising, what's the future of engagement going to look like? You know, one of the best things that happened when I came to Norway earlier this year and spoke to Gultag, and someone in the audience saw, and they invited me to speak at another conference. And that conference was a long way away. It was actually in Africa. And the conference was actually the global management conference for the heads of Richemont. So it was the CEOs of IWC, Dunhill, Cartier, Chloe. And all of them were in one room. You can imagine it was some colossal egos. But the big theme for them was their two big problems. How do we solve the problem of digital, and how do we solve the problem of brick, the emerging markets? And what they realized is that the core of a luxury brand was stories. Stories about the brand. That's how they communicated the value proposition of premium products. But how do you translate that to different cultures? And more importantly, how do you do that in markets where television, newspapers, and magazines aren't organized the way they are in the West? You know, one of the most fascinating people I met at that conference was actually a lady called Nathalie Massenet. Richemont had just bought Net-a-Porter for close to $400 million. And many of you would know it, of course. It's this wonderful online retailer. But the genius behind what Nathalie had done at the company was she created a website that worked more like a magazine. The content on the website, the merchandising, the videos, that's what really drew consumers in. That was true engagement. And in fact, she'd actually just recently even built an entire video and photographic studio within the office because they'd taken content so seriously.
Into our distribution center, samples get sent up here, and everything gets styled into outfits the way that the consumer might wear it. But it started out with, you know, a team of one.
This is just a website. I mean, how many normal physical retailers do this? But that's how seriously, you know, they took this idea of content being the primary basis to engage consumers. You know, you especially see this phenomenon in China, because in China, for a lot of brands coming to China, it's a very fragmented market. And most of the TV shows are government shows, so you don't really want to launch a hot new luxury brand using a state-sponsored broadcast. So there's been some very interesting work about working with these new IPTV platforms, with the YouTubes of China like Youku and Tudo. One of the interesting examples was Martell Noblige. When they were launching Pernod Ricard into the Chinese market, what they did was they spent a year sending bloggers across the country to answer the question, what was the quintessential cool, urban, metropolitan Chinese male? How did he think? Who did he want to be? What were his aspirations? And they used all of that to actually film a high-budget movie where consumers actually could determine the length of the movie, they could work out whether the guy got the girl or not. It was an entirely interactive experience. It sort of played something between the Thomas Crown affair and James Bond, with a Chinese twist, of course. And the thing was, you didn't see the bottles in every episode. It was very much a lifestyle, aspirational movie.
You are fine!
So this has become a trend we're seeing more and more now in China, of brands funding content as a way of cutting through. And they're also, you know, it's not just the sort of the obvious brands, it's people like L'Oreal. L'Oreal some time ago bought Yusei, which was a kind of a local cosmetic company. And they realized they needed to give it more contemporary context. So they basically funded an online-only series of webisodes, kind of a Chinese version of Sex and the City. But interestingly, it wasn't screened on television. Once again, it was entirely screened on these online video platforms. You can see it's very high budget. And this is something we really miss in the West. Just because it's on the internet doesn't mean it should be cheap. And you see this in markets like China, where your best chance of reaching mass audiences is actually through the internet, that you actually need to spend the money to create quality content. One of my favorite examples, though, was quite recent. It was this amazing campaign that was done in China. And it started with these viral images that appears across the web in China of this mysterious container that appeared in Germany. And more speculation was going on in the Chinese webosphere about what this container was. And there were weird installations. In fact, they even put the container right in the middle of downtown Beijing. And people on all the blogs were talking about what possibly could this container have inside it. And then this movie was released on the web in China.
Can you tell me exactly what you saw last night?
Look, this project was a perfect top secret, but we all have rumors. Rumors of a container being loaded and headed to China. It was magnificent. Who are you people? Have you seen it?
Sees the internet as their primary form of not only entertainment, but information. I was in Mexico not so long ago, and this was another market where they're really struggling with this idea of what's engagement going to look like in a very fragmented television market. And it was funny, I was actually there at the same time as Jack Myers. And around that time, the big story, the news was a plane, Aeromexico plane, had just been taken hostage. But it was the fastest kidnapping in history. Because that also happened to the day where the big soccer match was on. So the police get on the plane and they said to the terrorist, look, I don't want to hurry you, but do you think you could make this quick? The game starts in 45 minutes. And the terrorist was like, sure, these are my demands. And they cleared the plane, he got it in front of television, he waved at everyone. The whole thing was wrapped up in 30 minutes, it was amazing. It's really like, you know, an express hostage crisis. But you see, they take football very, very seriously in Mexico. And the interesting thing about the television market in Mexico, I spoke with the head of digital for Televisa, which is one of the major content companies in the market. And they've been experimenting with this idea of, should they as television broadcasters start creating their own web-only TV shows and use that as a platform for engaging with a new generation? Well, it turns out that was actually a very bad idea.
We produced two, and we did bad. But we learned the lesson. The lesson was, people want the shows. If you start producing content, unbranded content, even if it has a fantastic quality, you start competing head-to-head with even the non-professional, crappy video on YouTube. Because the most watched video on YouTube is not the professionally produced one. So it would be a coincidence or a piece of luck that you are successful in a social, in a user-generated content environment with an unbranded piece of content. And it didn't cost me that much money to learn that out, no? But I was personally fully convinced that that was the way, because we were convinced, in general, in the marketing and online industry in the world, that the internet users were different guys, and they were cool guys, no? But this is not anymore, no? Now you have the new transmedia concept of having exactly the same content in 3 screens, and the extended premium concept, which is developing additional content for additional platforms. Okay, because once you find a particular target and a particular piece of content that actually your audiences want, the risk of reach is reduced. So the only thing you have to excel is reach further engagement with exclusive content online.
So their whole approach now is working with brands to go deep around content verticals. So they work with Coca-Cola to find content that's relevant to that community and to then build it out. And one of the best examples was actually, around the hostage soccer crisis, because they were actually on that day live streaming the game. But what they did was they were actually simultaneously serving this internet portal, where most people, it was interesting, about 60% of them, of the 500,000 that registered for that, had the TV going on one side and had their computer on the other side with scores, statistics, and other different views. So it was really about creating an enhanced experience for the brand. And I think that's really the future of engagement. It's transmedia delivery, coupled with platforms capable of amplifying audience response. In the future, media companies will need to think like great brands, and brands like great media companies. So here's the final question for today. How does location technology change the way that media companies should interact with their audiences? If you think about it, location's always been at the core of media. And in fact, one of the greatest investors of them all, Warren Buffett, always said he loved newspapers because all they had to do was find a small town that was growing fast and he'd buy the newspaper, because as the town grew, so would advertising revenues. But you see, the thing is, location now means something different in media. And it means something different because of what's in your pocket. In every phone now today, we have GPS. And GPS has already taken over of our lives and led to bad decisions that, are only just beginning. It's amazing, every year, hundreds of thousands of accidents because people just blindly follow their location-based technology. But, it's things like Foursquare that we're starting to see really the beginnings of a big new consumer movement. The power of Foursquare, if someone checking into a place, is only when you look at the dashboard. I mean, can you imagine being a retailer and be able to see what times people most come, who your most popular customers are, what gender, what their demographics, how many of them posted to Twitter and Facebook? That's the kind of data you couldn't get unless people thought they were playing a game. You say to people, tell me your information, and say, no, privacy. You say, hey, it's a game, you get points. And they say, okay, how do I win? And in fact, people like Starbucks now are working with Foursquare. So if you're the mayor of a particular Starbucks in America, you get discounted coffee. It's smart stuff. But of course, the question then is, what's next after that? We know where you are now, but where will you be tomorrow? And I think one of the hottest companies that you'll see in the next 6 months is something called Plancast. Here's the Plancast of a friend of mine, Joey Ito, and you can see it doesn't say where he is. It says where he's going to be next week, where he's going to be next month. And so starting to map out that, that light cone of time where you're going to be. That's when, as marketers, you can start to say, wow, he's going on holidays next month. That's a good time that we can start serving ads relative for travel and hotels. So, in a way, as our mobile devices get more sophisticated, it starts to reframe the way we see reality. This is a really fascinating street artist that's just turned up in China. They're calling him the chalk god, or the architect, like out of Inception, because he's just using simple chalk to actually create these amazing 3D optical illusions on pavements. He's reconfiguring a reality just with his art. But in a way, our mobile phones will start to do the same thing as well. They'll give us a constant augmented reality layer. They'll know where we are. They'll know what we're doing. They'll know what we want. In fact, when you go past a McDonald's now in Tokyo, they use location-based marketing. So you walk past, they'll say, okay, if you come and buy a burger right now, we'll give you a free cup of coffee. So you walk in, from the queue, you can actually already order on your mobile phone before you even get to the counter. When you get to the counter, you put your phone down and you actually redeem the coupon you just got wirelessly. You then put it down again, and the cost of your McDonald's meal gets deducted not from cash, but from your mobile phone bill. So there are these wireless wallets now built into phones so that most people pay for things instead of cash with their phone. In fact, most of your mobile phone bill isn't calls anymore. It's things like hamburgers and clothes and movie tickets. This is a guy I met. He runs a company called Sekai Camera. It's a location-based augmented reality service. So I was in a restaurant in Tokyo, and I put my phone over where I was having dinner. And it actually brought up on my iPhone a picture that somebody had taken who'd sat in my seat of spaghetti bolognese, and a review they'd written of that meal. And if you like, all of reality will be like that. We'll be able to see the markups that other people have left for us. And, you know, one of the coolest things I saw was this building in downtown Tokyo. The whole building was covered with QR codes. And you know what? The reason why was because when you hover your phone over the building, it shows you what people are tweeting in real time, floor by floor. It's greatest if you're the boss. You just step outside the building and see what your employees really think about you. But I think what we're really seeing is a shift of not just mobile technology. It's a shift that happens when we have a mobile future where the web will never leave us. Always connected, our devices will become like a second skin, extending our awareness and ultimately accelerating our evolution. So are you ready for the future? The point I really want to leave you with is the fact that this is not just an upgrade. It's not the matter of you as newspaper companies buying the new high-speed printing press. It's not a technology transition. It's a total state change in consumer behavior. So if you've enjoyed today, I'd please encourage you to join my newsletter. If you write down this URL, mike-walsh.com/go. Every week I'll send you some interesting ideas and trends from my travels. But more importantly, if that's not good enough, I give away a free book every month. So there's nothing like bribery to get people to follow you on Facebook. So today I've asked you 5 questions. And here's 5 quick answers. The things you need to be thinking about are the new generation, the naturals. You need to be thinking about the factory and how that's been destroyed. You need to be thinking not just about consumers and what they're doing, but what they're doing collectively as crowds. And importantly, how you then engage with it. And the final piece is that the future of the web isn't the web at all, it's mobile, and how that's changing. When you put all of those forces together, there's no doubt we're moving into a new world. It's a world where we have got a generation coming through who've never known anything other than the web. They're a living challenge to us to rethink the way we do business, change the media game. And you know what? We don't have to answer the question, what is the future of media? Because it's being created right now before our eyes. So I'd encourage all of you today to think big, to think new, but most importantly, to think quick. Because if there's one thing I can tell you with absolute certainty, it is this: the future is now.